This lecture series tonight is called Sweet Dreams, the Science of Sleep. Now, before you get out your pillows, I want you to listen carefully about our speakers because I know you don't want to lose a single wink over this. So our first speaker is Nate Watson, and he is an associate professor in neurology at the School of Medicine here. He is the co-director of the UW Medicine Sleep Center. I want you to know that you guys took care of my skinny son who's 21 and has terrible sleep apnea, even though he's not overweight. Okay, he's a board-certified neurologist and sleep specialist. Nate joined the UW faculty in 2002, so a decade ago. He's a researcher, a teacher, a practitioner of sleep medicine. Look, the 12s are in the house. Go Hawks. He's adept at diagnosing and treating clinical sleep disorders of all types, including sleep-disordered breathing, insomnia, narcolepsy, and other hypersomnias, restless leg syndrome, periodic limb movement disorder, and circadian rhythm disorders. Wow, he doesn't just surf the web, he surfs the ocean. All right, Dr. Watson studies the genetic aspects of habitual sleep duration, sleepiness, and circadian rhythms, and he's investigating the gene-environmental interaction between sleep duration and diseases such as obesity, depression, and also he's interested in the interplay between neurologic disorders and sleep. He earned his medical degree at UNC in Chapel Hill. Yay! Did his neurology residency here, internship here, fellowship here. And that's how he got really super smart. He received a Master's of Science in Genetic Epidemiology from the UW Institute for Public Health Genetics, and he's currently the president of the American Board of Sleep Medicine. So, without further ado, I'd like to introduce our first speaker, Dr. Watson, please.
Thank you for that kind introduction, Terry. It's really my pleasure to be here tonight, and I know that Ed and I have a very engaging program for everybody in the room, and really, we want to educate you about sleep, but I think, my goal at the end of the day is to convince you of the importance of sleep and to get you to reprioritize sleep in your life. At midnight on April 26, 1986, nuclear engineers Leonid Tapatninov and Alexander Akimov were unexpectedly assigned responsibility for completing a systems test of an emergency core cooling feature of the Chernobyl nuclear power plant. The test began during the day shift, but due to a number of unanticipated factors was extended into the night. Deviations from approved test procedures, likely from performance decrements due to sleep deprivation and shift work-related circadian misalignment, led to a catastrophic power increase and core reactor detonation at 1:23 in the morning. The resulting explosion and fire released 400 times more radioactivity than Hiroshima. Cancer-related exposure deaths are estimated to be upwards of 1 million. Residents of nearby Pripyat were evacuated and told to take with them only what they needed, but that they would only be gone for 3 days. Well, their belongings still rest where they left them, untouched, 27 years later, and they'll sit that way for the next 20,000 years. Today, the radioactive remnants of Chernobyl Reactor 4 continue to smolder beneath the sarcophagus. On March 24, 1989, the 987-foot Exxon Valdez was the second newest ship in the Exxon shipping fleet. It was just loaded with 1.26 million barrels of North Slope crude oil bound for Long Beach, California. In an effort to avoid glaciers or calving icebergs from Columbia Glacier, Captain Joseph Hazelwood diverted the typical outbound navigational path to the east into the inbound path to Prince William Sound. He then placed the ship on autopilot and left the bridge, handing over control of the ship to Gregory Cousins, the first mate. Cousins had been awake for up to 18 hours, sleeping as little as 5 to 6 hours in the last 24. After some time exiting the passage, Cousins was beginning to set a course back towards the typical outbound traffic lane when he received an alarming announcement that the light for Bligh Reef was off the starboard bow. This was concerning to him because at that moment it should have been off the port bow. He immediately took the ship off of autopilot, steered it to the starboard side, woke up Hazelwood to let him know what was going on, and then a moment later felt a very large shock followed by 6 jolts. The time was 12:04 a.m., and the Exxon Valdez tanker was grounded on Bligh Reef at that moment and was leaking oil out of eight of its 11 cargo tanks. In coming hours and days, the waters of Prince William Sound and 1,000 miles of beach in south central Alaska would be fouled by 10.8 million barrels of crude oil. And here's some of the natural devastation that occurred as a result of that accident. On January 28th, 1986, was a very cold morning in Cape Canaveral, Florida. Crews were preparing for the launch of the Space Shuttle Challenger. The chilly temperatures brought to the forefront concerns regarding the solid rocket booster O-rings, which were crucial to containing the hot, high-pressure gases produced by the burning solid propellant inside the boosters. There had been concerns that at low temperatures, these O-rings would not function properly. There was evidence to that effect. Despite this concern, the launch was green-lighted. 73 seconds later, into the flight, Challenger disintegration began. Aerodynamic forces promptly broke up the rising spacecraft, killing all 7 astronauts inside and grounding the shuttle program for 3 years. The report of the Presidential Commission on the Space Shuttle Challenger accident highlighted the contribution of human error and poor judgment related to sleep loss and shift work to the disaster, noting that certain key managers had obtained less than 2 hours sleep the night before and had been on duty since 1 a.m. that morning. And lastly, the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration reports that drowsy driving contributes to approximately 100,000 motor vehicle accidents a year that result in 40,000 injuries and just over 1,500 fatalities. The reason I started with those slides is because I want to make it very clear that sleep is crucial to human health. And we live in a society where sleep deprivation is rampant. It's a public health epidemic, and it has real consequences for your life and for the lives of those around you. But why is this the case these days? Well, I think, this slide right here illustrates that in the sense that there's just not enough time in the day. We live in a time of a 24-hour economy. We all have careers. We have social obligations. We're caretakers. TVs are everywhere. There's thousands of channels. There's smartphones everywhere. Social media, tablet computers. There's just not enough time in the day. And what we find is that people typically rob time away from sleep in order to have time for these other activities. And I want to try to convince you that that's not good for your health and that you will live a happier, healthier life if you make a different choice for yourself. We're all happy that the Seahawks won the Super Bowl. I mean, that was awesome, and big Russell Wilson fan. However, he has a slogan which he's using as a part of a marketing campaign for an insurance company right now, and I think a slogan that he applies to his life, which is, "There's no time to sleep." And actually, there's a Twitter conversation, an ongoing Twitter conversation under this hashtag. And you can see here is my little contribution to this at the very top, that this perception of sleep concerns me. But below that, you can see, so much to do, not enough time. So many things to do. Type A. You know, the current zeitgeist is that if you're sleeping, if you're prioritizing sleep, you're not taking your career seriously, you're lazy, you're not serious about what you do, you don't want, you're not trying to have as much fun as you can in this life of ours. And, that's something that we all have to work against in order to really appreciate the fact that we need to sleep. I live on Bainbridge Island. I commute by ferry in the morning, and I can't tell you how often I see this sight right here. This was just a random morning. I'm sitting in my seat, and there's two people sacked out. This is like 7 o'clock in the morning. I think that, what we know right now is that about a third of Americans are sleeping less than 6 hours a night. Typically, we consider most people need 7 to 9 hours of sleep a night for optimal physiologic functioning. We're sleeping about an hour and a half less now than we were 100 years ago. And clearly, human sleep need has not changed in that period of time. I mean, think about it. The first hints of life on Earth happened a little over 2 billion years ago, okay? We didn't control fire until 1,000 years ago. The light bulb was invented around 137 years ago. So for the vast majority of time that we've been on this planet, the only thing that we know about light is from the sun and from the stars. But we're living in a time of dramatic change as far as our exposure to light is concerned, and that has serious consequences for our health, and I'll talk a little bit more about that as we go along. But first, let's talk about what's the purpose of sleep. And I think, this is a huge question. I don't think that we really have the answer to this. I think part of the reason why sleep is underestimated is because it looks so inactive. I mean, you're lying there with your eyes closed. You can't really be doing anything worthwhile, right? But what we know is that there's a lot going on while you're sleeping when we measure your brain waves and your physiology. The purpose of sleep, to some extent, is memory consolidation. What we know is that it increases creativity, so your ability to creatively solve problems increases threefold after sleep. It conserves energy, and it's also related to changes in gene expression, and we're doing some research on this right now, and a lot of that is related to protein building within the body. Sleep is also important to clearing out the metabolic byproducts of neurotransmission in the brain. So those are just a handful of the many purposes of sleep. I said, there's a lot going on with sleep. Sleep is active. These are the stages of sleep for those of you that aren't aware of them. Sleep is broken down into non-REM and REM sleep. Non-REM here is N1 through N3. This makes up about 80% of your night in general, depending on your gender and how old you are. The most important stage is probably N3. This is when growth hormone is secreted. This is the stage of sleep that you recoup. Your body recoups first if you've been sleep deprived. Stage N2 makes up about 50% of your night. These are sleep spindles, and we'll talk about the importance of sleep spindles in a little bit. These are 14 hertz spindles. These are K complexes, another characteristic of N2. Stage REM is typically the stage of sleep where you dream. But you can dream in other sleep stages. You can see here, these are rapid eye movements down here. These are the eyelids. Chin tone is less. This is muscular tone down here. You can see it's less than it is in these other stages. Your body paralyzes itself in REM sleep so you don't hurt yourself by acting out dreams. When you do act out dreams, that's a disorder called REM sleep behavior disorder. And then you can see a low voltage mixed frequency EEG here for REM. So those are the sleep stages that happen when you're sleeping. This here is called a hypnogram, and it's just indicative of what happens throughout the night. Here on the x-axis, we have hours of sleep. On the y-axis, we have the different sleep stages. Sleep is in ultradian rhythm, and you can see here that it happens in cycles here throughout the night. What I want you to appreciate again here is that N3, there should be a 3 right here, that's N3 is happening preferentially in the early third of the night. REM is happening more so in the last third, okay? And so this is kind of how, what we would call normal sleep architecture through the night. Sleep subserves many functions in regards to health. And we think about not just sleep deficiency, which I've been talking about quite a bit, but also sleep disorders. And Dr. Weavers is going to talk about obstructive sleep apnea in his talk, which is a very common sleep disorder. But what we have in the middle here is another one of those hypnograms, but this one's indicating a patient that's struggling to breathe. And that's what all these red lines indicate here. We know that sleep deficiency and sleep disorders increase your risk of stroke. They increase your risk of cardiovascular disease, obesity, hypertension, and last of all, and perhaps most importantly, mortality. So we hear people, with this current zeitgeist, sleep's not important. Oh, I'll sleep when I'm dead. Well, I mean, they might be more true than they think when they say that. There was a very interesting experiment done by Alan Reckstoffen a number of years ago that looked at sleep in a rat model. And this was really a diabolical experiment from the rat's perspective, okay? You had two rats that were on a glass platform here in a body of water. There was a partition between the two. Both rats were getting their EEG measured, but only one rat was the EEG yoked to the rotation of the platform. And so anytime that rat began to fall asleep, the platform would rotate 360 degrees and would knock both rats off into the water, forcing them to wake up in order to swim back up onto the platform. Okay, so this was, for the rat that was yoked in the experiment, this was a total sleep deprivation experiment. And what they found was that this rat was eating more food, but despite doing that was losing weight. Their plasma thyroxine levels got all out of whack. They began to lose hair in clumps. They got a scaly appearance on their tail and on their skin, and ultimately after about 21 days, the rat died. Sleep is necessary for life. Some epidemiologic studies have looked at sleep duration and mortality in humans, and this is a meta-analysis that took data from a number of studies that assessed this and then pulled it all together. And this study actually assessed 1.3 million individuals that were followed over various periods of time for mortality. And what they found was that if you were a short sleeper, which typically being less than 7 hours a night, but more extreme could be around 6 or 5 hours a night, your relative risk of death was increased. And if you were a long sleeper, your risk of death was also increased. Long sleep typically being considered over 9 hours, 10 hours, 11 hours, that kind of thing. Now, the short sleep, we have a lot of data showing physiologic changes in animal models with short sleep that are bad for you. So I think that this is clearly, I would say, in some sense, a result of the short sleep. The long sleep is another matter. To me, this is probably a surrogate measure of poor health in general. If you're spending a lot of time, if you're sedentary, if you're ill, if you're at home, if you're estimating how long you sleep, you may overestimate it some, but it's probably really just indicating that these individuals are sick to begin with. Also, it may be that sleeping longer is a part of the normal dying process. I mean, we don't know that, but that's certainly a part of something worth considering. Sleep deprivation, if you deprive yourself of sleep, now this was a very interesting study, I thought, and very elegant. They looked at your performance on a hand-eye coordination test, and they took some people, they sleep deprived them, they had them do this hand-eye coordination test, and then they got sleep saturated them, and then they gave them alcohol and tested their performance on this hand-eye coordination test. And what they found was that individuals at the point where they were sleep deprived, or they hadn't slept for between 21 and 25 hours, performed worse on the hand-eye coordination test than those that would be considered legally drunk in the state of Washington in regards to driving a motor vehicle. Okay? So getting back to these motor vehicle accidents occurring as a result of drowsy driving, I think we all agree that if you're impaired by use of alcohol, that you should not be driving. But we haven't gotten the message out that if you're sleep deprived, you also should not be driving. And I think that that's a message that we really need to get across. How much sleep do you need? Dr. Watson, you've told me, okay, I'm not sleeping enough. Well, how much do I need? Help me out here. I think that this is something that is individualized. We know that a certain portion of sleep need is heritable or genetically driven. And before I answer that question, I want to show you some data which just gets more at this notion of insufficient sleep and rest from the Center for Disease Control. So they are asking people how many days a month they feel that they get insufficient sleep or rest. And in those that endorsed greater than or equal to 14 days a month, they've plotted here. So the percent that endorsed greater than or equal to 14 days a month of insufficient sleep or rest. And you can see that even in the best states, some of them here on the West Coast, upwards of a quarter of individuals feel that they don't get enough sleep or rest. The percentages are the highest here in the Rust Belt and the southeastern states, all the way up to 37%. If you drill down and look at Washington State, what you can see here is that it's worse along what would consider to be, I think, the I-5 corridor here, particularly in Pierce and Mason County, and then some of the coastal counties, Pacific, Wahkiakum, and Cowlitz. And maybe folks are sleeping a bit better out here in the rainforest. Rain has a tendency of doing that, helping you sleep. I wanted to show that map because these are also maps from the CDC showing the prevalence of diabetes and obesity. And if it looks like you can overlap that with the sleep map, it's because there is a pretty tight relationship between short sleep, impaired sleep, sleep disorders, and diabetes and obesity. And with the obesity relationship, I'll show you some research that I did recently, and my group did, investigating that. But yeah, again, we're looking at the Southeast, we're looking at the Rust Belt here, where the prevalence of obesity and diabetes is at its highest. So how much sleep do you need? What I tell people is take a vacation. So that's great advice, right? Everybody wants their doctor to tell them to take a vacation. But when you do it, you have to prioritize your sleep. So go to bed when you're tired, listen to your body, wake up spontaneously, don't set an alarm, and do that for 2 to 3 weeks. And I think that it's probably also important where you travel. If you go to Paris, there's a lot of City of Light, you got a lot of things to do, many museums. It's probably going to be hard to prioritize your sleep during that vacation, so you might want to go to an overwater bungalow on a deserted island, if you can, for this. But do it for a few weeks, and then at the end of that time, whatever the amount of time between when you went to bed and when you wake up, whatever that is, that's probably the amount of sleep that you need for normal physiologic functioning. And when I talk about that, I'm talking about remaining alert and awake throughout the day without need for caffeine. Okay, let's turn and I know this is Seattle, so that's a little bit blasphemous to say that without caffeine, but. All right, so this is going to talk about a little bit of research that I've done with twins. I work with the University of Washington Twin Registry, where we have many twins that volunteer their time to help us answer some important medical questions. Before I talk about that, though, I do want to make a quick mention of, or talk about circadian rhythms and diurnal preference. And I think it's worth learning something about Thomas Edison. So what we know about Edison, he's a great inventor. He invented the light bulb. And as great as the invention of the light bulb was in general, it was probably the single worst invention in regards to human circadian health out there. Now, I'm not suggesting the light bulb is bad. I'm just saying that's the case. I want to read you something that Edison said. So not only did he invent the light bulb, which is bad for circadian health, but he also said, sleep is a waste of time. It's a heritage of our cave days. People will not only do what they like to do, they overdo it 100%. Most people overeat 100%, they oversleep 100% because they like it. That extra 100% makes them unhealthy and inefficient. The person who sleeps 8 to 10 hours a night is never fully asleep and never fully awake. They have only different degrees of doze throughout the 24. For myself, I never found need of more than 4 or 5 hours of sleep. I never dream. It's real sleep. When by chance I have taken more, I wake dull and indolent. We are always hearing people talk about loss of sleep as a calamity. They better call it loss of time, vitality, and opportunities. Just to satisfy my curiosity, I have gone through files of the British Medical Journal and found not a single case reported of anybody being hurt by loss of sleep. So there you have it, this zeitgeist, this war against sleep, this culture that we live in. I mean, it's been around for a while. It's been around since the time of Edison. Now, what he won't tell you is that he was a prodigious napper. And here's a picture of him taking a mid-afternoon nap. And that's Harvey Firestone on the left and President Warren Harding on the right. So even in that company, he would, so he's probably sleeping more than he thought he was. But circadian rhythms are really important to our health, and so I want to talk about the light bulb to introduce this topic. We have a natural circadian pacemaker called the suprachiasmatic nucleus in a part of our brain called the hypothalamus. And it's entrained to the 24-hour day mostly through exposure to light. So we have light that hits our eyes, and it stimulates some melanopsin-containing retinal ganglion cells. So these aren't really cells that help you see, but they detect light. And through what we call the retinohypothalamic tract, it stimulates the SCN. The SCN then, in turn, has a multisynaptic connection back to the pineal gland, which is where melatonin is secreted, which is, melatonin in many ways can be considered hormonal darkness. When it gets dark out, this suppression is released, melatonin is secreted, and it facilitates sleep. If we look at the two-process model of sleep, we can see that there's two elements that are driving sleep and wake. One is the circadian alerting signal that I just talked about, driven by the SCN and trained by the sun. The other is quite simply a homeostatic drive to sleep. The longer you stay awake, the greater your drive to fall asleep, the greater your need to fall asleep. We don't know exactly what is driving that homeostat, but we think it might be adenosine, which is a byproduct of cellular metabolism. Anyway, as you go through the day, these two forces oppose each other. As the homeostatic drive goes up, the alerting signal goes up to oppose it, to keep you awake. Keeps you awake at night, right now, despite the fact that you have a high drive to fall asleep. But then when it gets dark out, that melatonin gets secreted. It in turn inhibits the SCN, and it allows you to fall asleep. I'm going to talk a little bit more later on in this talk about sleep neurobiology, but this is kind of an introduction to that and an introduction to understanding the two-process model of sleep and your circadian rhythms. Circadian rhythms involve things beyond the brain, so it's not just sleep-wake cycles, but almost every process in your body and many organs, including vascular reactivity, liver functioning, aldosterone secretion, which can affect blood pressure and result in myocardial infarction. Many, many processes in your body are related to this circadian clock. And that's why shift work or having irregular sleep-wake schedules that aren't entrained to the natural light and dark cycles is bad for you. We know that shift work's associated with sleep deprivation, cardiovascular disease, certain cancers. So getting enough sleep is not just enough. The timing of it also matters. So let's talk about twin research a bit. We decided to look at diurnal preference, which is if I ask you, when do you function best? Is it in the morning or at night or neither? And if, are you a morning lark? Are you a night owl? That type of thing. And here we looked at sleep, whether you were evening or morning type and how long you slept. Now, I already showed you that short sleep and perhaps long sleep are bad for you. Well, here we saw in our twin model increased risk of eveningness in individuals, or that was eveningness was associated with increased risk of both short and long sleep in the overall twin model, okay? Suggesting maybe eveningness is what we would call an endophenotype of poor health, and I'll talk more about that in a minute. When we looked at it within twin pairs, this relationship didn't hold up. We looked at eveningness and insomnia, just a simple questionnaire whether or not you have trouble falling or staying asleep. And again, eveningness, evening type was associated with increased insomnia risk in the overall twin sample, but not within twin pairs. And we looked at depression in eveningness and found a relationship between evening type and depression in the overall twin sample, but not within twin pairs. So with all these things, insomnia, sleep duration, depression, finding a relationship in the overall samples tells us there's something there. When we don't see it in the twin sample, it tells us that when we account for genetics, because the twins are identical or near identical if they're monozygotic, and we account for shared environment that they had when they're kids, the relationship goes away. So it suggests that, that there may be a strong genetic component to it, or genetic confounding would be the way we would term it. We also looked at alcohol use and diurnal preference, and we found that evening type individuals had a greater propensity to drink alcohol, the quantity of alcohol they drink, and binge drink. Okay, so again, suggesting that perhaps something about being an evening type individual is not good for you. And this is a very complicated slide, and I'm not going to cover too much with this, but what I wanted you to know is that this relationship between alcohol use and diurnal preference was related to the shared genes between diurnal preference and alcohol use. So the genes that drive both things together are what's driving this association. Okay, let's talk about this interesting question. Can you sleep yourself thin? I mean, there's a relationship between sleep duration and obesity. Wouldn't it be nice if sleep would make you thin? And we did some research on this in our twins, and this is the first study that we looked at, and we did find that the short sleeping twins had a higher body mass index, which can be a measure of obesity. Now, these are younger twins. None of them were obese, but the shorter sleeping twins had a higher BMI than the normal duration sleeping twins here, both in the overall relationship and within twin pairs. So this is saying when you control perfectly for genetics, you still find the relationship. So it suggests the relationship is strong. We took it a step further to look for a gene-environment interaction. When we do twin studies, we can establish what we call the heritability of something, which is how much of something is genetic. And not only that, but we can see how does that genetic aspect of it vary according to some other variable. And that's what we did here. You can see on the x-axis we have sleep duration. On the y-axis we have proportion of variance in body mass index. So we found in general that the less you slept, the higher your BMI went, okay? But not only that, if you look at the additive genetic component here, the less you sleep, the greater that genetics contributes to your body mass index. So the greater your genetic risk of having an elevated BMI. So this suggests that something about short sleep turns on genes in your body to want to make you gain weight, okay? Now, this would seem to suggest that if you're trying to lose weight, that you might be more successful if you're doing it in the context of sleeping a normal amount, which again we would consider to be about 7 to 9 hours a night. And that's shown here. You can see as sleep duration goes up, the environmental components come to the forefront. And if you consider interventions, diet, exercise, what have you, those are environmental interventions, okay? So there's going to be a greater opportunity for those to have an effect. And there are some studies that show that. So there is one study that looked at a standardized weight loss program and found that individuals that were sleeping 7 to 8 hours a night lost more weight than those sleeping less or more than that amount. And then there was another study that looked at caloric intake over 2 separate 14-day periods and found 55% reduction in the proportion of weight loss as fat in the sleep-deprived condition, which is 5.5 hours a night, compared to the sleep-satiated condition. So I think that evidence is still developing, but right now, anyway, it would seem to suggest, and I think we need to study this more, but that perhaps sleeping a normal amount will make you more successful in your weight loss efforts. Okay, that's all I'm going to talk about in regards to my research right now. We are investigating other things. Like I said, we're trying to look at the specific genes that are activated with short sleep. And if we're successful at getting further NIH funding or sponsorship, we should be able to pursue those research avenues. Okay, let's switch gears a little bit. How many of you have heard about Phineas Gage before? Okay, pretty good amount of you. So this was an unfortunate, or perhaps fortunate, guy. Back in 1848, he was a blasting engineer in Vermont. So they were making a road in Vermont, this was his tamping iron right here. This was custom made by his neighbor. And what they'd do is drill a hole into the rock. They'd put blasting powder in, a blasting cap, and then sand on top of it, and then they would light it, and it would blast the rock. Well, what they think happened was they were doing this, but they forgot the sand, and then as he was pulling the tamping iron out, a spark flew, and the thing blew prematurely, and it blew his tamping iron right through his head here in this way. And somehow he survived this, okay? He went to the doctor. I mean, everybody was, if you go on Wikipedia and read about it, it's incredible. I mean, they said when he went to the doctor, he walked in the door and then he vomited and a teacup full of brain came out of his head, okay? But anyway, so he survived this, but his personality was changed afterwards. And he, okay? But I put this here because, I think in neurology we often learn things by seeing, if somebody has a deficit or damage to a certain area of the brain, it can tell us, and then we observe a change, it can tell us something about the importance of that area of the brain. And it made me think of a patient that I had a number of years ago who was a successful local businessman, and he took a trip to the Amazon rainforest and spent a few weeks down there. And then he came back and just had devastating sleepiness. And it turns out that he developed a disease called neurocysticercosis. And basically what that is, just to give you a brief summary, is that it's related to a pork tapeworm. So tapeworm would be, the human host would have it. They would excrete the eggs in their feces, which then are eaten by cows or pigs. They get cysts in their muscle, and then a human eats an undercooked piece of pork, and they get the tapeworm. So that's kind of the cycle. Now, my patient kind of cut the cycle in half. In other words, he probably ate some contaminated leafy greens that were prepared by somebody with a tapeworm who had eggs probably on their hands or on their person, and then he ate that, and he got the cysts. And he didn't just get a cyst, but he got a cyst in a crucial area of the brain in regards to sleep. And that's an area called the hypothalamus. And you can see that here on this sagittal T1 image, this tiny little lesion right here. And this is a crucial area of the brain in regards to your ability to stay awake, because there's a neuropeptide called hypocretin or orexin that's produced in that area of the brain. And so he developed what we call secondary narcolepsy. Narcolepsy, which is a disorder of excessive sleepiness due to this neurological disorder. And the reason I bring this up is just to let you know that the hypothalamus is an area of the brain that's of particular importance, and I'll show you a little more about that in a minute. And I want to turn my attention to a disorder, a very rare disorder called Klein-Levin syndrome. This is a disease that strikes in adolescence typically, or late childhood. And we don't know the cause of it, but the people that develop it basically develop excessive sleepiness, and they sleep for 20 hours or more a day. They have behavioral changes, they're in a dreamlike state, and they have these intermittent episodes where they'll have a spell that can last weeks to months at a time, and then they'll come out of it and they'll be normal for a while. And then they'll have another spell. And this will go on and on and on over many years. And I want to show you a video of a patient of mine who we have here tonight, Alana Wong, who's kind enough to join us to share her experience with this disease with us. First, I'm going to show you a video that she's provided me of her when she's suffering from this disease, and then we'll have her come up and explain her symptoms.
I feel like I'm in a dream. I feel like I'm in a dream.
Really?
Ew. I threw up 5 times.
You did.
Yeah.
What'd you,
I'm gonna make Mom a pretty picture.
a pretty picture? Really?
Yeah.
What of?
Flowers and trees and a heart.
How come you're gonna make Mommy a picture?
Because I want to.
Hmm?
Because I want to. No!
Are you getting tired?
No!
Huh? I think you're getting tired, honey.
Nobody likes me!
Oh, come here.
Baby hates me!
She loves you.
She said she hates me!
She would never say that.
She did do say that!
Come here.
Nobody likes me!
It's just completely different. It's not even the same person.
Okay, Alana, would you come up, please?
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thank you for being here. Really appreciate that. So maybe you can just share with us your experience with this disorder. I mean, tell us, when did it come on? What does it feel like? That type of thing.
Yes, definitely. I got KLS when I was 10 years old, and from 10 to 14, it was very light. So the symptoms came in and it wasn't so severe, and from 15 to 21, it was very severe and episodes were constant. And each time I would wake up from an episode, I have no memory of the episode. So if, for instance, if I fall asleep on February 1st and wake up on February 22nd, that whole time is completely wiped out. So I will not remember. I will wake up and think it is the day that I fell sick on February 1st. So it's a very devastating disorder.
So, when people have this disorder, when they're in the throes of it, like in this video, they appear to be sleeping all this time. But what does the sleep feel like when you're in an episode versus sleep you're having, let's say now, when you're not affected?
When I'm in an episode, the sleep is completely different than when I'm awake. Right now, when I'm awake, I have a normal sleep and I feel completely normal. My brain is healthy, and when I'm sick, it's like I'm in a dream state 24/7 and a nightmare state 24/7. So I'm not able to differentiate between reality and not. So if my mom's in the room asking me, Alana, what do you want for dinner? I'm not sure if she's actually there or if I'm actually dreaming it, if she's asking me that question.
Sometimes when folks are affected by this illness, they'll have what we call hyperphagia. They'll eat ravenously. Is that something that happens to you?
Yes, that has happened to me. And it's devastating because during episodes, you have no memory of the time spent. So I can wake up and I'll gain 10 to 15 pounds and have no memory of what I had ate during that episode.
Some of you may have heard of this disorder. Another term that people use is sleeping beauty syndrome. Alana, how do you feel about that term to describe this illness?
I think sleeping beauty syndrome sounds like it's a very pretty illness, and it does not give Klein-Levin syndrome justice. Klein-Levin syndrome is not a choice. It's a physical illness that is inside the brain. So it's an organic problem. There are tests that have been done that have shown there is a 30% blood reduction going to the hypothalamus during episodes. So,
when you see the video of yourself affected by this illness, what goes through your mind?
it's very difficult on me to see myself like that because that's not who Alana is. That's not me. And it's a part of me. KLS is a part of me. It's something that happened to me. But KLS is an illness that unfortunately can happen to anyone in this world, and it happened to me.
It's very rare. I mean, we estimate it to be about a 1 in a million disease. The prevalence might be higher than that, however, because I think a lot of kids that get affected by this end up getting diagnosed with an atypical depression or a psychotic depression, and they often end up in mental institutions. What happened to you when you were first having these symptoms? How long did it take you to get a diagnosis?
I went undiagnosed for 8 years, and it was very devastating during those times from 10 to 18. I went to countless doctors, and I was misdiagnosed and mistreated. I was put on antidepressants that made my Klein-Levin syndrome worse. And I was misdiagnosed with everything under the sun, possible schizophrenia, depression, and finally, at 18, I found out what it was that I had.
I think when we when I see Alana, I'm just amazed by the support that her family has given her. Clearly, the only way that you get through this disorder is to have a tremendous support system and good care, because there's really not much you can do to treat it. So you need to the family needs to understand the illness and really help you through it, rather than isolate you further, because it seems like something that you should be able to control.
Yes, and that's the devastating part about Klein-Levin syndrome, is it is so rare, and the behaviors change in your brain. So your behaviors change, but it's not who you are. KLS is a part of me, but it's not me. I'm the Alana right now. This is me. And when I'm sick, there's no control whatsoever. And it's critical when you're going through Klein-Levin syndrome or any kind of illness to have a support system and to have at least just one person standing by you that loves you, cares about you, and will be there during your lowest times.
Alana, anything else you want to convey to the audience about this illness?
Yes, I would like people to know that despite going through a difficult challenge and a devastating illness, that you can get through it with a support system in place and with people that surround you and wrap their arms around you, and you are able to prosper and have a good life.
Thank you very much. Alana will stick around and be available for questions after Ed's talk. So Alana, we appreciate your time.
Thank you, Dr. Watson.
So this is Alana's functional MRI study, and as she mentioned, that there was hyperperfusion or reduced blood flow in an area of her brain called the hypothalamus, but there's also an area of the brain called the thalamus where there's reduced blood flow, and that's what I'm showing here. You can see on this side, on your left, this is when at a time when she was not affected by the disease. This is an area of the brain called the thalamus in here, and if you compare this perfusion study, this blood flow here to this, you can see that there's a substantial reduction. We also see reductions in other areas of the brain, including temporal lobes, mesial temporal lobes, orbitofrontal lobes, basal ganglia. But what we believe is that it's really mostly the thalamus being affected, which is what's causing the problem in people that have this illness. And the thalamus is a fascinating part of the brain. Sensory information goes up to your brain from the rest of your body through the thalamus. Sleep spindles that I showed you earlier are generated in the thalamus, and the thinking is that there's substantial thalamocortical synchronization that happens during sleep, which allows sleep to occur in the rhythmic manner and also prevents sensory information from disturbing your sleep. There's another very rare disease called fatal familial insomnia, which is a terrible disease. It's an autosomal dominant. It can be an inherited disorder. It can also occur from unique mutations. Most people that have had it, or that it's been described in Italy, but it's a disease basically of degeneration of the thalamus, progressive degeneration of the thalamus, and those individuals basically get to a point where they can't sleep at all. They become psychotic and then comatose, and then ultimately they die. It's something that I've never seen personally, but it is an illness, and again, also affecting the thalamus, another crucial area of the brain in regards to sleep. So I want to finish with talking about just a little bit more about the neuroanatomy of sleep, and also, again, a bit of a history lesson. So this is Baron Konstantin von Economo, who is a Viennese neurologist, and back in 1916, he discovered a new type of illness, which he described as encephalitis lethargica. So this was related to a virus that swept across Europe and North America at the time, and the people that got it ended up having problems with their sleep, and they were either excessively sleepy, or they couldn't sleep at all. And he found that when he did post-mortem studies, that the individuals that were excessively sleepy typically had lesions in this area. And again, this is the hypothalamus, so that area where the gentleman from the Amazon rainforest got his disorder. Or this hatched area, which is more in the basal forebrain. These individuals that had disease here ended up with problems with insomnia. And so that brings us to this slide, which is a bit busy, and I don't expect you to remember everything, but just know that there are two different pathways that keep you awake during the day. You have this dorsal pathway, the lateral dorsal tegmental nucleus and pedunculopontine tegmental nucleus, which are cholinergic in nature, which go through the thalamus, which we just talked about, and help keep the brain awake. And then you have all these monoaminergic amines in here that related to the locus ceruleus, the raphe nucleus, the hypothalamus again, the tuberomammillary nucleus, and all of these areas are also working to keep you awake actually right now as you listen to this talk. When you're going to bed at night, then this area called the ventrolateral preoptic nucleus in the basal forebrain is of particular importance, and it goes back and it inhibits all these other areas of your brain that are trying to keep you awake, okay? And so it's really this notion of these two areas inhibiting each other to create a flip-flop switch to allow you to fall asleep relatively quickly and wake up relatively quickly. And so here, during wakefulness, you have a system where the locus ceruleus, tuberomammillary nucleus, and the dorsal raphe are all active. The orexin or hypocretin in the hypothalamus is also active, and it's inhibiting the VLPO, and you stay awake. And you have this circadian alerting signal I talked about earlier, right? It's driven by the suprachiasmatic nucleus, which is helping you stay within the awake state. Then when you go to sleep, of course, it gets dark out, melatonin secreted, the SCN is inhibited, the VLPO becomes active, and it inhibits its inhibitors and allows you to fall asleep. So this is this notion of a sleep-wake flip-flop switch, which works to allow quick state transitions between wake and sleep. So in conclusion, we talked about the zeitgeist, sleep when I'm dead, no time to sleep, that kind of thing. We talked about the folly of that. And so, it's not humorous, and don't treat it as such, and it's not brave, and it's not macho. It's actually bad for you. The purpose of sleep, we discussed a little bit about how it maintains normal physiologic homeostasis, cardiovascular health, metabolic health, memory consolidation. Showed you the rat study by Reckstoffen, the sleep and mortality discussion with the meta-analysis showing increased relative risk of death with both short and long sleep. We talked about how much sleep you need and the nice vacation that you're going to take. We talked about twins and sleep, showed you some of the research that we've done in our group. And then we explored the neurobiology of sleep through some case reports and Alana's experience, as well as von Economo's encephalitis lethargica. And as I bring this to a close here, I was on vacation last week with my family, and I buying some groceries, and I saw this Oprah magazine, and I read the headline, how to feel so much better. Who doesn't want that, right? So I had to get it and read it, and it was very interesting, actually. Very well written. But what I wanted to know was, is there any mention of sleep in here? And let me just read you the first paragraph or the intro to it. It says, if an apple a day keeps the doctor away, what can juice fasts, acupuncturists, energy healers, sensory deprivation tanks, and liquid nitrogen chambers do? Oprah sends a brave troop of seekers to investigate the fascinating, zany, and occasionally transcendent new ways we're healing and improving our bodies and minds. Sounds good. So the first paragraph of the first vignette, which is a woman who went on a wellness retreat, this is the first couple sentences where she says, I once greeted the day with sugar-free Red Bull, followed by a few visits from Dr. Pepper. Then I sloshed home to Kim Crawford, my favorite Sauvignon Blanc, because I needed caffeine. I needed caffeine because I was groggy in the morning, and I needed the wine because I was wired at night. Okay, so then I kept reading. I'm like, oh, well, they're on this, right? They're understanding that they're all this caffeine and everything. The only mention of sleep duration was in a vignette about something called Ayurveda, or I'm probably saying that wrong, but it's a 3,000-year-old Indian medicinal art, which helps people achieve optimal balance of what they call the Vata, the Pitta, and the Kapha. I won't tell you exactly what those things are, but apparently this person had a Kapha imbalance that was causing her to sleep 10 hours a night, and once she got that back in balance, she said, I had so much energy I was staying up 90 minutes later. So anyway, I was like, okay, so you need to sleep less. That's the message. But getting back to that Twitter feed I had earlier on the hashtag No Time to Sleep, I went through that and tried to see if there was anything else in there, and I was taken aback by this one. That Get It Done, 35 Habits of the Most Productive People. And I went to the link, and I found this algorithm, which actually was really, some of it I had heard before, but some of it I think would be helpful to make me more productive. So I was reading with a lot of interest. And then I said, aha, here it is. Under the body portion of this, it says, sleep more and you will get more done. So I think, with that, what I want you to do in your own lives is focus on the quality of your wakefulness experience rather than the quantity of it. If you give yourself enough time to sleep, you'll be a better decision maker, you'll be thinking more clearly, you'll be a better friend, husband, father, son, and really your quality of life will improve and your overall health will also improve. And the best part about it is it's essentially free. So with that, I want to thank my collaborators in my research, the folks at the UWTR, Deidre Buchwald and Jack Goldberg, Alan Pack at Penn, who's been a big help. This is my grant support here. I've worked with the University of Virginia with Eric Turkheimer and Aaron Horn, and then Paige Harden, who helped do the analysis in the twin study, gene-by-environment interaction. And I'll leave you with this final slide. William Dement, in many ways, is considered the father of sleep medicine. And he says that dreaming permits each and every one of us to be quietly and safely sane every night of our lives. Thank you for your attention.